I am Joel McLeod, and welcome to the 905er. Well, it's that time of year again. As we close out 2025, we look back at what was and what a year it was. Two general elections to start us off this year. The political landscape shifting dramatically for two major parties, one at the federal level and the other at the provincial. And of course, all of this happening under the threat of tariffs aimed at crippling our economy, brought on by our once most trusted and valued ally. What will 2026 look like with America under the rule of the impulsive Donald Trump? I think it's easy to say that 2025 has been a change year. No matter what, from here on out, things are really going to be the same. So, all that being said, what was the greatest story of 2025? The biggest scandal? And what should we expect for the future? Well, to dive into these questions and more, I asked a few friends back to the podcast to discuss the year that was. Joining me today are Teresa Lubowitz, former Queen's Park staffer, principal of Lightbulb Narrative, and host of the Progress Canada podcast. Opposite her is Nathaniel Arfin, one of the key organizers of the New Leaf Liberals, who challenged former Ontario Liberal leader Bonnie Crombie's leadership and forced her resignation early in September. I invited them to join me today to look back on the year that was and what we should look forward to in 2026. Have a listen. Okay, thank you, Teresa and Nathaniel, both longtime guests of the podcast. Thank you both for coming on for this special year-end 2025 episode of the 905. Thank you both for taking the time to come on.
Of course. Happy to
Thanks
be
for
here.
having me. Yeah, absolutely.
So, as I asked both of you to brainstorm before coming on here, I wanted to get a sense. Let's get into it. What looking back at 2026, I think it's been a very eventful year uh, in the province as a whole, maybe even the country if we want to go that far. Uh, I want to start and just get a sense of what you think the top story is, or what the biggest story of 2025 has been for you. Um, Teresa, you logged on first, so I'm going to throw it over to you first. Ladies first.
There you go. I mean, I think everyone would probably agree that the tariffs and Trump have been the biggest story of the year and how that has impacted us and the fallout of that. And I think at this point, that is not a 2025 story. That's going to continue being a story, at least until his midterms, should they happen. Jury's still out on that for me. So I think that's going to be the enduring story. But from an Ontario political lens, I think the secondary story, of course, was the snap election, which was as a result, supposedly, of the tariffs. So those are the two big pieces this year. And I think they are continuing storylines as well. Like this is a bit of a soap opera in that, you know, going into 2026, Doug Ford has removed the requirement to hold elections at a specific time, so he could call another snap election at any point in time. Trump is always threatening new tariffs. We're heading into the CUSMA negotiations about free trade, or whether we will continue to have that. So I think these are continuing storylines, and much like soap operas, the plot doesn't change very much from day to day.
I'll agree with you on that one. It seems like we've been doing this forever, and you just reminded me, it's really only has been 1 year of this, but it feels like this has
Yep.
been the life of Canadian politics for as long as I can remember, which is a sad state of affairs, perhaps. Nathaniel, what are your thoughts on the top story of the year?
I definitely think that the Trump tariffs trumps everything else. Pardon the pun, but in terms of the Ontario lens, I think Teresa, you touched on it a little bit there. It's the fact that Doug Ford continues to change the rules as he goes, and that's been a through line of his premiership throughout. But it's really it's crass and it's happening at a different level at this point in time. And I think we're seeing him amp up his use of the mandate argument quite a bit.
Well, I'm gonna concur with both of you that the Donald Trump will be the top story in Canada for the foreseeable future. One Whether it's tariffs or something else, who knows? Um, but the question I think is like here in Ontario, are we really equipped to handle it? I mean, you ask anybody in Ontario, our economy is intensely tied with the American economy, and within a year, we've kind of had that. Just the president just came in, tipped over the table, and said, "Forget it. We're starting at square one." And we've been doing this for a year. And I'm wondering, have we, like, what lessons have we learned? Do you think we've learned politically from this in this province? Like I still get this. My sense is like the Ontario Conservatives or progressive conservatives and even the federal conservatives kind of think this is a blip. This is like a structural, fundamental change to our relationship with the American economy. This is we just need to get past this and it's going to be back to normal and everything will be right as rain. It, like, do you think we can expect that, or should we be looking at something far more structurally different? And Nathaniel, I'm going to ask you to chime in on that one this time.
Uh, Whether or not our politicians are treating this as a fundamental change here in Ontario, it is a fundamental change, and that's at least being recognized at the federal level. We see Mark Carney touring the world, signing accords with various countries, talking about the fact that Canada has to diversify our economy and we need to move away from our reliance on the United States. Doug Ford and the conservatives, they don't seem to have recognized that. They don't seem to have changed much beyond the way that they talk about things, but there is no significant investment in upskilling our workers. There's no significant investment in reskilling people. We are looking right now at a world where lumber mills are shutting down, our steel factories are shutting down, and instead of having a plan to transition these workers into more in demand industries, we are throwing money at the companies and praying that times get better. Times aren't going to get better for lumber mills. Times aren't going to get better for these steel factories, not for a long, long time. And it's going to take more than us throwing money at companies and hoping that they do the right thing for us to make a fundamental shift in our economy and to support the workers of Ontario.
Teresa?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about how the economy was before Trump, it wasn't great. This is a premier who's campaigned on his economic record, such as it is, and we've never really had a great jobs record under Ford. We've had really, really high unemployment under Ford through most of his mandate, and that's now clocking in at almost 8 years. Um, and I think about the way he approaches the economy in general. And so he's about returning back to how things were. And it's this politics of nostalgia, which has never served any jurisdiction well in any point of human history. You can never really go back to things. You have to figure out what the next thing is and adapt your workforce, your resources, your province to actually thrive in that reality. And, we saw this in the 1980s. We had enormous change that led to a liberal government at that time coming in after 43 years of conservative rule because they were not recognizing, one, the opportunity of the future, but also two, the decline of the past. So I think Ford is doing very much the same thing now. And when I think about, Carney, again, signing all these deals and stuff, that's good. But I think we also have to be looking into what Nathaniel was just talking about, which is transitioning the economy. And Ontario is not doing that at all. Like Doug Ford's big strategy right now is to build a tunnel highway, to build Vegas North, while Vegas itself is already struggling economically. Like these are not the answers of the future. And then when you think about, the jobs that are closing down, that doesn't even touch the fact that youth unemployment is at 16% in this province, likely to go up once seasonal jobs disappear after Christmas. And, young people are not even entering the workforce yet. So what does the future look like for them? Not very good at this point.
I was Nathaniel, your point, and Teresa, your points there just were triggered a memory in my head here. And I remember like Dalton McGuinty used to go on trips around the world on the taxpayer's dime to drum up business. I remember him going to Israel to promote water filtration service, like a water filtration company setting up shop there, as well as going to China uh, to at the time we still like China, but to get business going there. And I'm not saying Ford has to follow in his footsteps, but I do say that this is a premier for the largest economy in Canada and the most powerful and influential province in Canada. I am surprised that this premier has not traveled, um, has not kind of tagged along with Mark Carney to, or done like a Team Ontario building, taking major industry players and going to Europe, going to Japan and India and maybe even to China to say, listen, times are different. This is what we have to offer. What can we do to make it as Doug Ford likes to say, make a deal? Um, y- like, do we need something like that going forward? Just get out there and see the world and see who wants to do business with us.
Do you think that's something that obviously happened a lot in the 1990s under Chrétien? They had that Team Canada
Right,
approach where the
right, right,
premiers
right.
would get on the plane with them, go to whatever country, drum up business. And, until recently, you used to always hear about foreign direct investment. Like this was a measure that governments would always talk about all the time. Ford does none of that. I don't know if he's not curious about the rest of the world, but it seems like he only goes to Florida and Muskoka. Those are his two vacation spots, and that's why we're not having the legislature sit until after March break, I suspect. And I think the one other place he went to was secretly to Texas to go meet executives of 7-Eleven, who in theory he probably could have met here as well. So he just doesn't seem that interested in promoting Ontario to the world. At least, by going abroad himself and being a salesperson, which he claims is, something that he's good at.
Nathaniel?
The thing I'll add is that in order to attract foreign direct investment, we need to have a stable economy and a stable regulatory framework for companies to operate in. Right now, we are seeing a lot of lobbying changes that do benefit business owners who are established here, who have the connections. I worry that companies look at the chaos and I, I'm not going to say corruption, but the very, very close semblance to corruption that exists in Ontario. And it's hard for me to imagine being in business and saying this is a great place to set up shop. I-
On on that note, I guess you're writing the script for us, Nathaniel. So let's segue into the next big question I asked of both of you is what do you think was the biggest scandal or really the top negative story in the news cycle? I threw it to Teresa first, so this time I'm going to you, Nathaniel, first time.
this is really difficult because there's so many. Uh, to me, it always comes back to education and the consistent underfunding of education to the point that we are now uh, canning directors of education days before Christmas break. There's clearly a desire for micromanagement, but also a desire to not actually address the fundamental issues in education. We need, as the Ontario Liberal Party is right now saying, we need more adults in the classroom, and that doesn't mean police officers. That means more educators who are OCT certified. We need more EAs who are full-time, who have themselves treated like adults and educators rather than as babysitters. That is what we need in education, and to deprive our children of that and to do so in such a craven way by stripping away our democracy, our local democracy, bit by bit, and slowly and silently underfunding and leading to more and more cuts, that's the biggest scandal to me.
Uh, I'm going to come back to that because yeah, you've touched a nerve that one. Teresa, I'm going to throw it over to you.
I think what's happening in education is terrible. Like I'm the child of a teacher and I'm a product of the Harris education system. So I have a lot of opinions about this myself. But I think what's happening in education is less scandal and more ideology. Like this is a choice by the government to deeply underfund education so that they can push people towards private education, et cetera, et cetera. When it comes to like pure all out scandal that just didn't have to happen, but was a choice that they made, I think the Skills Development Fund really does top everything. To me, it's their sponsorship scandal, both in terms of the scale of it, like it's actually wildly outperforms the sponsorship scandal in terms of how much money is being wasted. But in terms of like the stories that keep coming out day after day, the number of people involved in the scandal, just everything about it. There's nothing good about the program. The only thing they can seem to talk about is how maybe some women were hired, but they can't point to any data actually showing anything about what the fund has achieved at all. And when you think about it all, it reeks of everything that they have been doing in government from a corruption perspective. Like it's just how can we reward our friends? And we were just talking again about foreign direct investment. Well, why would you bother with that if those people can't donate to your party afterwards, right? Like, if we
Right.
bring these things back together, it starts to make a lot of sense that this is about rewarding your buddies internally who can help and elect you in the next election again. So I think that one takes the cake. I don't think it's going away. I think there will be more police investigations involved in it, and we'll see where it goes in 2026.
I'm going to correct you there, Teresa. They did name the women who were paid. They were CNE strippers. Uh,
Yes, of
uh,
course.
No, no, the owner came out and said no strippers received money as a result of these
right,
funds.
right, right. Um, I, I am going to say like the tying thread of both of your arguments, and I'll be honest, I do think they're equally valid, because education, I think, is great equalizer for us to compete on the global economy if we can just be smarter and more creative in getting our kids ready for the future problems. But the skills development fund you can't ignore. But I would say the common thread seems to be giving money to donor buddies, as you said, Teresa, but also Nathaniel, firing education directors and school boards to replace them for $1,500 a day cronies, who are going to be supervisors. Yet we don't, they're not passed by any committee or scrutinized by a public
Yeah.
voucher or whatever have you. So that kind of, well, I was just going to say, is the common theme here is that this, despite being the stewards of the tax dollar, what we're actually seeing is the Ontario PC party basically pilfering the public purse to enrich their buddies. Like this is,
Yeah.
I'm going to say this is Putin-esque. Uh, I'll say like I do find this behavior is very much like in line with a Russian oligarch system. Um,
It
I'm
is.
gonna.
It's something, we had John Fraser on the podcast this week, and I was comparing it to like a PC donor rewards program. Like that's essentially what it is for their donors and also their former candidates, though. Because like we're talking about education, of course, you have the EQAO test scores that the minister was hiding from parents, which is just ridiculous. But if you think back to where the EQAO story started under this government, it was about rewarding a former failed PC candidate with a plum position to lead that process. And now here we are years later with kids who are failing at all levels and the minister hiding that fact from parents. And this is education reality. And it's all because what they're putting first is rewarding their friends with either plum positions or, kickbacks through government programs.
And Nathaniel, you were wanting to chime in on that.
Well, it's absolutely the case. We see it with the when they replace the trustees with these $350,000 a year uh, interveners. They don't actually do the work of the trustees. They aren't available to contact parents. We're now finding out that they expect the boards to fund these parent outreach supports. So that's more money cut from the education budget. And all of this money is getting funneled to insiders and friends of the Conservative Party. Um, it's not blatant corruption. It's they're naming people to boards, they're naming people to commissions. This is the kind of stuff that they have the right to do, but we as voters need to hold them accountable, and the opposition parties also need to hold them accountable. One of the big difficulties, though, is the volume of scandals and the difficulty that we have bringing that common story together and voicing it as both an opposition and as individuals. A lot of times we get lost in the noise of it all.
Well, I kind of want to touch upon that, in that this isn't anything new. I mean, the Ontario PC party has been in power now for what, 9 years? Um,
7.5.
okay. Okay. Um,
Just feels like 9.
well, I mean, they'll be in power for another, in theory, another four or another three at least. So 10 years total by the next election, if all goes according to plan. Um, Yet we've seen nothing. I've always said this, like, there has been no legacy project. There's been no program. There's been no infrastructure project. There has been no massive change to the way this province operates that I am aware of. That the future, like my grandchildren or our grandchildren, can look back and say, "Yep, that was the Ford legacy. Well, I'm living with the consequences of that, good or bad." Yet, they're elected for a third term, and now we're pushing ahead with this. Are we just basically saying, like, they've just kind of said, yeah, screw it, we don't care about the appearance of good governance anymore. We're just interested in, yeah, screw it, let somebody else deal with it. Is that what we're going to expect for the next 4 years in Ontario? Is guess my question now.
If the first session has been any indicator, yes, that's exactly what we can expect. It's it's difficult for me to even try to pretend that we can do things differently. We haven't seen any sustained impact on their favorability, on their electability, on anything. Ford's personal favorability can keep going down and down and down, but it doesn't matter until there is something else that people can rally behind and stand up behind. We saw a glimpse of that in 2022 when the education workers went on strike, and there were a lot of people rallying behind them. And it wasn't just unionized workers, it wasn't just the labor sector, it was everyday Ontarians who knew that we deserved better. Until we find something to rally behind, I suspect that Ford's gonna keep doing whatever the hell he wants.
Yeah, I think there are a few components to this. One is that, and I've always said this, like people do not really care about scandal and corruption because they assume that's what all politicians do. So when you harp on that day in and day out, or talk about the importance of democracy and all of these things, like that almost never wins a campaign or moves a voter. And yet that is largely what the opposition has focused on. Now, that isn't to say that you can't push back about the things that they're doing. You absolutely have to. But the thing I've been pitching to various, liberal leadership hopefuls is come up with an actual anti-corruption plan, put that in the window, make that one of the first things you actually put out as a policy plank, so that every time Ford does something wrong, you can sweep whatever it is into that bucket and then pivot to the thing that you're going to do in government to make things better. And until they actually do that, and I did pitch this to Marit Stiles too, like equal opportunity here. Any progressive party, go for it. I did pitch that to her too, but I think until they actually end this advantage Ford has of filling the window with junk, until they close that off and make people focus on individual things that he is doing, until they put an alternative vision in the window that is compelling, we're just going to keep seeing more of the same. And Ford knows he can get away with it.
Well, on that note, like, I guess my question is, where have the opposition parties been? I mean, I know since they got this current iteration of the legislature was elected in February, and quite frankly, I find, like, for the last almost 10 months, like, both the NDP and the Ontario Liberals have kind of been just twiddling their thumbs on this. They're, this I question, like, where are they? And I know everybody says, oh, they're getting all these great sound bites in at Queen's sorry, at question period, but I'm like, who cares? I'm in tune to politics, and I couldn't care less about sound bites in question period.
I will say a few things. One, they have sat for 51 days, so that is part of it.
Right.
There, but I'm also of the argument that no one really pays attention to the question period anyway. I think part of the thing is leadership politics being in the way. Like for both parties, with Marat Stiles and Bonnie Crombie, you had this question of will they, won't they stay for the bulk of the year. Essentially, the campaign ended in late February. Neither of those questions were really solved till the fall, till September. So until those questions were moved out of the way, there wasn't a lot of forward momentum that could have been had. Now, I will have a caveat here in that both of them could have been doing things to show that they were willing to change and learn. And I think Marit Stiles was more successful with that. She replaced her leadership team. She did a summer tour consulting with Ontario voters. She really changed their message track. Like it's very focused on cost of living things now. And I have seen all of that. I think Bonnie Crombie was much more focused about staying on as leader and didn't do any of that work. And now that she is still technically, the ghost of Christmas past at this point, and she is still hanging around, the party can't really move on. Like they don't even have a proper interim leader right now to sort of lead the charge and make it about the team, et cetera, et cetera. John Fraser's doing great work functionally filling that role on his own. He's done it twice. He knows what he's doing. But until that handoff happens, and I hope it happens in early January as someone is looking at a different position perhaps in Mississauga, I hope that handoff happens because until you have the old leadership move on, it's really hard to start building things back up. And I suspect Nathaniel probably agrees with me on that point.
Absolutely. The party has really stalled since September out of the AGM, and that's unfortunate because those kinds of events you can start to build momentum out of them. And we really haven't. We haven't captured the energy, and we haven't done enough work as a party to keep our wheels turning and keep things going. I do think a large part of that is the fact that everyone doesn't know what is going on. Uh, the fact that Bonnie Crombie is still in the leadership, it's it confuses people because she's not the person at the front of the party. She's not delivering the messaging. She's not standing in front of cameras. Uh, I know she's attending some fundraisers here and there. She apparently went to the LPC dinner as well, but we're not seeing her be the leader of the messaging and be the leader of the party. This time could be an opportunity for Bonnie Crombie and for the Ontario Liberal Party. She could be moving on and doing her own thing. And even if she didn't want to, if she put herself into the leadership role that she is in right now, she could be using this time to distance the party from the baggage that we have in the past that she didn't even have involvement with, but she definitely did still suffer from. But if she committed herself to this leadership and to helping the party move on, it would be a different conversation. But the fact is, we've seen nothing for 3 months, and it's not only time for the party to move on, it's time for the province to move on.
I
I
do
would
think
so
too, like one thing I will say about that too is people keep talking about the fundraising piece and how she's staying on to help with that, et cetera, et cetera. I haven't seen any of that personally, but that doesn't mean anything. But I did get the direct mail piece from the party for Christmas, and she's not on there anywhere. There's no one who it's actually directly from. It's just a one-sided piece, just sort of generically to a member from the party. And even from an email fundraising standpoint, as somebody who used to run that at the party office and write all those emails, not having a leadership, not having a face on that campaign at this time of the year where you're making at least half of the money that you make throughout the year. Now, this was a campaign year, so there's that, but you're making at least half the money you make throughout the entire year in this last 4 weeks, and we don't have any leadership attached to it. And it's not like you can add John Fraser to it because he's not officially in the role. So I actually think that really, really hampers the party's fundraising efforts at this time of year. So I don't really buy that argument, and I think it is harming the party.
I would I do want to get into the Ontario Liberal Party, because as far as I can tell, they are the outlier in Ontario politics currently. We know who the NDP are. We know who their leader is, what they're standing for, and where they are kind of going to go. You can like them or leave them. That's up to you. We know who the Ontario PC Party is. We know who their leader is, Doug Ford. Right now, like nobody knows anything about the Ontario Liberal Party. We knew that Bonnie Crombie was leader, but she has resigned. And they've just kind of let themselves, in my opinion, fall into obscurity, which is a dangerous place to be. You don't want to be the person who's like, just wait and see, because that's kind of what got Bonnie Crombie in trouble was this, let's wait and see. It just, just got to give me a minute to introduce myself. And we wasted a year on that. Um, what is the holdback here for the Ontario Liberal Party to try and, get in the fight and say, get off the ropes and start throwing a few punches, politically speaking, of course, to start getting people to notice them?
Uh, from what I understand, it's the party is being as diligent as possible when considering their options for the rules in the upcoming leadership race. I I understand the desire to be cautious and make sure that we're attracting as many people as we can, but at this point, we have to consider the fact that we look unprofessional as an organization, and we look like, as you said, we're flailing, we're floundering without clear direction and without actual movement in the party. We're not getting anywhere. I am very disappointed that the leadership vote or committee seems to be waiting until February to release the rules for this leadership vote. We really needed to move faster on this, and the rules should have been out by now, last
Are we,
week.
as the, is this hesitancy to kind of get the fight going, so to speak, turning potential contenders off? The reason I bring this up is Karina Gould, who was one of the names kind of floated as maybe she will, maybe she won't throw her hat in the ring, has come out and said, "No, I'm out. I am not going to run." Um, I've heard people say that there was talk behind the scenes and they said she would never win and that's why she resigned. But, we'll never know because she says no. And I'm wondering, and I've also read articles that Andrew Buzari, Dr. Andrew Buzari, who's another big name toted and maybe he'll throw his hat in the ring. He's saying, "Oh no, maybe I'm not now. I'm going to go run federally uh, uh, in Toronto." And is this hesitancy starting to turn off people that really the Ontario Liberal Party should be wanting to attract in, maybe not as a leader, but maybe as a backbencher, or maybe even a possibly minister who can help rebuild the party into a fighting force?
So I think there's a few things happening here. So there's a fundamental misunderstanding in the party that an interim period between leaders means you can't do work. Like this is not actually true. So between 2018 and 2020, like again, I just had John Fraser on and we were talking and he seemed almost wistful about that period because we actually accomplished so much in that time in terms of rebuilding the party. John used to come on for monthly conversations on webinars with the membership. The president at the time, Brian Johns, also did that. Like we were very active and very visible. We did a lot of building behind the scenes. And that was all while trying to put on a leadership race. So, and I was there in 2013 doing that leadership race when we had almost no time to do it, but we were still doing things in the background. There's always time to do things in the background. I think the complaint I have heard is that there aren't enough resources in the party to actually do these two things at once. I don't think that's true personally. I think caucus, with its enlarged size and support from LCSB, can actually be doing a lot on the messaging front. And if they were allowed to have a proper interim leader, that person could lead that message track and then that whole team could be pushing that. That would leave the party apparatus itself to actually focus on the leadership race itself. In terms of the timeline, I did some math because I wanted to look back and see, people always talk about, well, this race was that long and this race was that long and yada, yada, yada. But we always compare it to when the leader resigned versus when the previous election was. And I did some math. And if you look at 1996, the time between that election loss to when the leadership was held was 17 months. When you look at 2013, it was 15 months. When you look at 2020, it was 20 months. When you look at 2023, it was 18 months. So it's more or less the same amount of time across all of these things. And if we were to extrapolate that to this period, 15 to 20 months, which was the sort of window that we saw there, would put the next leadership race, if it were called in that timeline, to May or October of 2026. Now, my preference has always been for May, as Nathaniel knows. There are people who would rather have it in September, October. There are some people who are talking about doing it in 2027, which I do not advise. But I think this is part of the conversation because what we don't see behind the scenes is the people actually managing this process are constantly being pelted by feedback. Now, there was the member survey, but there's also various prospective leadership campaigns who are constantly emailing them, being like, why don't you just do this? And, none of those campaigns are free of bias. They have their preferences, which would benefit their candidates. And, part of the argument we saw about Karina Gould and any federal MP is that having an uncertain length of the race or a long length of the race when there's a minority parliament federally makes it really, really difficult. Like trying for leader in Ontario when you constantly have to maybe come back to parliament to vote to make sure the government doesn't fall, right? So this is really, really complicated. All the candidates have different considerations. And, even with normal nominations at the riding level, like we see these arguments come up. And so I think there's an element of like, recognizing that maybe we can just have good faith arguments about it and it doesn't make someone evil if they have a different opinion. And if we get to that place, then maybe we can be a bit productive with this. Now, my preference would have been to have the rules out post Thanksgiving at the very latest, late December, even if you want to say like, okay, but the starting gun doesn't start till January for like tax purposes, or you're not filing different things. Like I know that's all complicated, but I think delaying this long just creates a sense of disorganization and discomfort in the general membership, and people really do want to get going. Even if you get going now, that doesn't mean the race has to be short. It could be longer. Again, my preference would be for May, but
I'm gonna
Nathaniel.
back you up on that May one because if we're not doing it in the summer. Everyone knows that. And I really don't want to conflict with the municipal elections.
yep.
We should have a leader in place by the municipal elections. They should take the summer to meet some candidates, go around and get our people onto those campaigns so that we can start building that experience in our volunteers.
I fully agree. And of course that gives the new leader the summer to do the summer barbecue circuit, which I think is really, really important from a fundraising standpoint. I know I'm constantly talking about fundraising, but it is incredibly important. And I think that's just an obvious window to get them out there, not just fundraising too, but also meeting the membership and building those relationships and going out to communities and meeting people beyond the membership to grow the party. And I think the point about municipal leadership is important because something that we're very bad at Liberals is actually building up that pipeline of candidacies. And if you don't let people run in the municipal elections because you have this leadership race hanging over them, you're actually harming that pipeline as well for future candidacy. So it's another benefit to doing it in May.
I'm going to throw this out to both of you, and I thought, as as you both know, and our listeners know, I was a former liberal in another life. Um, no longer am one, but the last leadership race, I thought the problem that I saw coming out of that was that liberals didn't talk to Ontarians; they only talked to themselves, which was very dangerous as it turned out because it was the same old people just reiterating old tired arguments, and nobody was looking at this what life was like actually on the ground in Ontario. My worry is like as I'm seeing this right now, um, the party seems to be falling into the same old trap in that they don't want to talk to Ontarians, not where they're at. They don't want to talk to Ontarians about what their concerns are, what their worries are, any of that. Just seems it seems to be like how to, and I don't mean to belittle you, Teresa, but as you were saying, talking to the membership. And my thoughts are, do they need to talk to the membership, or do they need candidates who are going to say, I'm going to talk to Joe and Jane Main Street. I'm going to go talk to the people who've never voted Liberal in Windsor or in London
Yeah.
or here in the 905. Um, Go down to Niagara Falls and Grimsby and Hamilton and Oshawa and talk to those people and say, what is it that that we're not getting.
Well,
And
that is why I did add and meet other people beyond the membership when you're doing these tours. I will say, I think both of you know I've been doing a project on the Peterson years in government, and it's been really, really interesting because again, this was after a period of 43 years of conservative rule, and then suddenly the Liberal Party came up. So the question is, how did they do that? And one of the major ways they did that was by expanding the tent. And when we say expanding the tent, we're usually talking about like, oh, just go a bit wider on policy this way and that way. That's not what it is. It's actually just about engaging more people and not writing people off from the get go, and actually going in and meeting people where they are and actually touring the province. And John Fraser and I were talking about this too, because I don't know if you guys are nerds like me and have been watching Pakin's The Premier Files, but I've been watching all of them. And he had one with Mike Harris, who is somebody I would take almost no lessons from. But the lessons I would take from Mike Harris was that when he became PC leader in 1990, he wasn't ready for the campaign. It was a snap campaign, so they sort of wrote that off. But then in the interim, between 1990 and 1995, people forget again, the Liberals were supposed to win that election in 1995. They were ahead in the polls. But the PC party just kind of came up the middle because Mike Harris actually went to all these small communities and talked to people. He talked about how there was one community that literally two people showed up at the event for, and he still went and he talked to them and they had a great time. And that's sort of how you have to do it. John Fraser talked about how we need to have a grinder as a leader, but we also have to have grinders as like party members and party operatives. We have to have people who are willing to put in the work to understand there are no quick wins, there are no saviors. You actually have to go and talk to human people and you have to hear what they're saying. And it can't just be about counting heads. You actually have to engage with them and find out what they're all about and see how we can actually address those issues and where there's commonalities. And until we get that perspective in, like I think, having been there in the governing years, and Joel, you probably remember this too, like there's a real sense of once you're in power long enough, you kind of think it should just keep happening. And you
yeah,
don't really think that there's work you have to do to keep those ties strong with the electorate. And you get really, really used to just being in power. And I think we still have somehow after 8 years governmentitis where we just don't think we need to do that legwork. And that doesn't mean that everybody has to go canvass a set number of hours or be on the phones a set number of hours or whatever it is. We all have different skill sets. We can all contribute in different ways, but recognizing that we all actually need to be doing something.
I fully agree with all of that. We need to be growing the party in meaningful ways. And we often talk about it as organizers and as political people, we talk about growing the party. And yeah, it usually means how do we get more numbers on our list? How do we have more people to call on GOTV? But we need to start thinking about it as how do we involve these people in our organization? How do we take a diverse set of skills and create systems and teams that can contribute in meaningful ways? We have a diverse membership. We have people in every corner of Ontario, and we have people from every kind of background, be it labor to, male people. And we have everyone in this party, and we should be taking advantage of who they are, what they're good at, and the organizations that they belong to outside of the Ontario Liberal Party. We need to be connecting with people where they are and finding connections to the people that they know and finding meaningful ways to bring them into the fold.
I
and
think
I,
we
you know,
also have to embrace volunteerism because this is something again that happens in government. You get really set in your ways about, well, we have professionalized the organization, which I think is important from an HR standpoint or from other standpoints. But as soon as you lose this willingness to engage with volunteers and trust them with the work, you're not going to be growing the party. And I think that is one of the biggest areas of that we have problems now as a party because you have these like expert operatives who come in and glom onto a new campaign every time there's a leadership race and they tell that leader what it's like, and there's no like thought process about perhaps we could do things differently, perhaps it's a new era, perhaps we should start growing the organization again because counting heads doesn't actually add new heads to the count. So I think this is something that we have really missed out on, and a leadership race above all, is supposed to bring in new bodies.
Mhm.
And I think this has been the criticism in the past, is that we're not bringing in enough new bodies because it's all about, well, I'm with this person and you shouldn't be here and yada, yada, yada. And it's not about actually bringing in more people.
Um, I do want to ask both of you. I hear what you're saying about, grassroots volunteerism, and mine your well of talent. Absolutely, I'm all for that. However, I have had people of different professional groups on the podcast, and I'm wondering, like, where those alliances need to be formed to make the Ontario Liberal Party competitive again. I'm seeing Merritt Stiles taking selfies with Laura Walton of the Ontario Federation of Labor, who I've had on the podcast, and I'm getting the sense that clearly, like, the NDP is trying to rebuild those union ties that as a base. And I'm wondering, between Doug Ford taking kind of the private unions, thinking of Leuna, and his clear ties to Bay Street, where does that leave uh, the Ontario Liberals to start building those ties with those kind of organizations, uh, to kind of go to bat for them come election time?
We have to show that
Yeah,
we are dedicated to those groups and that we are dedicated to the causes that they support before we can expect to build any alliance or any relationship with them. We have effectively walked away from labor as a party. We have effectively walked away from uh, the the homeless community, the people who need support services, safe injection sites, health care services in mental health capacities. We as a party have walked away from all of these groups and all of these organizations who want to build political connections so that they can send out their message. But we have to demonstrate to them that we're a party that represents their values. And right now, as a party, we haven't committed to building great things or building new things. We haven't committed to respecting the rights of workers to strike. We haven't committed to not legislating back to work. And we have actively voted on legislation that allows municipalities to evict the homeless, and we have voted to get rid of safe injection sites, safe consumption sites. So I'm not sure where we're going to find partnership or where we're going to find political allies as a party until we start doing the meaningful work to turn this party around into something that does support people and does support the good jobs that they need.
yeah. Historically, again, from that 2018 to 2020 period, there actually was stakeholder work done. Like lists were made, different folks representing the party went out and had conversations, and that work was done up until the point, at least until we had a permanent leader again. I don't really have insight into what happened after that. Perhaps that's also just a sign that nothing happened after that. I'm not sure. But this is something that, beyond the fact that we are not engaging on these issues in a positive way, we're also just not doing the legwork. Like we don't do stakeholder engagement anymore as a party. And even in government in the tail end, when we did it, we would do it about 10 seconds before the election. And we would do it in a really ham fisted way that would bring on almost nobody onto, the party side on these issues. So I think, we talk about a leader needs to be a great fundraiser. Well, maybe they need to be a great relationship builder as well. Like we don't talk about that enough as a skill set, as part of the skill set of a party leader. And I remember in the Win years, like, we had teachers protesting outside of Maple Leaf Gardens at the time. So I remember that. But, there were actual conversations with some of these leadership camps with these stakeholder groups about how they would bring them back into the fold. We just haven't seemed to do that in recent leadership races. And I think that's a really important piece that's missing. So I'm glad you brought it up because I can't recall in the last few rounds of leadership races that any of those kind of conversations have happened at all, at least not publicly.
In the last Ontario Liberal leadership race, I tried to have on all the candidates at the time. the one thing that they all were talking about was, oh, we need to reach out to business. We need to become the party of business again. Um, I have an opinion on that, but I want to get your sense on like how vital is it then to, the party of business, whether it be small business, big business. I just hear like we need to be business friendly in Ontario. And I want to get your take on that as a strategy or as a guiding principle for a leadership candidate.
I, you know, I have strong opinions on this. As a small business owner myself, I do think that we talk about business, and when we talk about business, we talk about big corporations, and we talk about bringing companies to this province to create jobs. But when you look at who actually creates jobs in Ontario, it is small business owners. It is not usually big corporations. Yes, they bring a lot of jobs into a specific area, but as soon as they pull out, it's really problematic, which you don't really get with small businesses. So there's that part of it. The party did put forward, was it before the last election? I can't remember now. They did put forward legislation in the House to actually cut the small business tax in half. So this is something that they were focused on, but it's not enough of our messaging. It's always about these corporate handouts, which I don't think anybody, any normal voter feels great about these days. Like we look at what's happening under Ford right now, where a company is given $100 million to lose fewer jobs than what they were originally intending. Like, what is that as an approach to governance? It's not a good one. And I'm always back to the math. Like when we talk about this, about, renters versus landlords, like go with the math, go with where more people are. There are more renters than landlords. There are more workers than bosses. Like, why are we just not understanding the basic math of how populations work and actually engaging with those people? So, I think it's fine to come up with plans that serve businesses well, but only in the sense that they actually help workers. And we need to tie those two things together because at the end of the day, it's workers who go vote, not corporations.
Nathaniel.
The other aspect of that is that when it comes to who can afford to work in urban centers, we're largely talking about people from the suburbs or even the exurbs. Like I have friends who travel an hour and a half from Aurelia to get into downtown every day. And that is an increasing drain on our society's productivity. Uh, we're not doing enough to create jobs, and we're not doing enough to deal with the systemic issues that cause job flight. People can't live where they work, so businesses can't afford to hire locals, so the economies hollow themselves out, and we have a commuter economy. Until we start sincerely and legitimately dealing with the housing crisis in Ontario, we're going to have a jobs crisis. We're going to have an environmental crisis. We're going to have energy crises. We're going to have all of these mounting problems because no one can live. No one can afford to live here.
I've always wondered why, kind of, but touching on both your points there. Teresa, you have a bit more of the communication angle, but Nathaniel, you're talking a bit more of the practical angle there. Um, I've always wondered, like, why don't we turn Bay Street into the villain of the narrative story? Like, I do question. I know because you need them to kind of fund the campaign. You need them to cut the checks, but at the same time, I don't think they're going to, because they seem to be pretty tied to Doug Ford at the moment. So my thoughts are, what do you have to lose by saying um, they're the source of all your problems? Like, what's wrong with putting Galen Weston and Doug Ford on the poster saying these are your problems, guys? This like all of it. You can't make your mortgage, you can't make your rent payment. You are being asked to commute 2 hours a day to work, and you can't afford to put food on the table of your family despite working 40 hours a week. It's these guys' fault. That's it. These two, plain and simple. Like why won't that message work? Or would it work?
I think the thing about that is when a new leader becomes leader, the first one of the first things that they do, well, actually, when they're running for leader, they're pulling together a list of donors to fund that campaign, first of all. But then they get into the leadership position, and then they start going back to these same folks to make a maximum donation. And this is a piece of frustration I have for many years now, because again, I'm a small dollar donor fiend. That I really like monthly memberships, monthly donations. Like, these are just sustainable practices that actually build up parties, as opposed to asking people to give a max donation once or twice before a campaign, and that's it. But when you are going after those max donors as the way to fund your campaign, rather than actually trying to find some grassroots money, what you do is you ensure that you're not going to go after those groups. And then you really do push yourself into a corner. Now, I want to read a quote from a speech that David Peterson gave before the 1985 election, because I think it's really good framing. So it's: the Ontario Liberal Party is the only party that is not in the back pocket of any special interest group, not of the bank presidents or the union bosses. I think it's great for a few different reasons. One is that it actually does go after Bay Street. And, you're thinking back to the time, again, the PC party was largely run by Bay Street at that point, and that's why this was actually a really good way to break down that coalition and fight back against it. But it also is showing that the Liberal Party was not beholden to any special interests, regardless of which side they were on. And I think we have to find ways, one, to engage with groups in a way like that, and then also message on that front. Like, you have to find, people talk about centrism, which I hate, of course, but let's have centrist messaging where we actually do find a space for ourselves between the other two parties and the interests that they're beholden to. Because, like you said, like, I don't think anyone has a great love for Bay Street or the billionaires who functionally run this country, but as a party, we don't call them out because we want their money. And I think, I'm a big supporter of just getting all money out of politics and just having it be fully subsidy based. But, that's a
Yeah.
policy I would put forward if I was running for leader, but I'm not going to be doing that. So, while we have the money, I think we just need to fundamentally change how we pursue money in politics and actually focus on building up sustainable giving, so that we aren't beholden to these max donors who work for corporations, et cetera, et cetera.
Another darker side of it is the fact that these big companies find interesting and creative ways to attack uh, politicians they don't like. And we've seen that in the financial disclosures of Ontario Proud. And we've seen that throughout our electoral history. Companies are able to make a big difference, and if you piss them off, they'll come at you.
It's very true. Like, if you remember back to the late Win years, where you had the folks behind Tim Hortons and also Loblaws pushing back against minimum wage increases, like, this is something that they get very vocal about. They put their money behind. So beyond just, donations, there are other ways that this money can factor into these campaigns.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm a big supporter of the idea that we need to have a living wage in this province, and so I'd love to see a political leader tote that as a way to combat the affordability challenge that we're seeing. Um, but I know you're right. Like, I worked for Tim Hortons at that time when I was on the conference calls for franchisees to say, oh yeah, we know we're risking losing all of our stores because you know coffee's going to be unaffordable, and and Wynn brought in $14 an hour minimum wage, and they ended up raising the price of a Boston cream 20 cents, and no stores shut down due to financial failure. So I think like right there is a win of like, yeah, this is what they'll say because it's their only argument, but the reality is it doesn't work out. If anything, you're just putting more money into the economy, which creates more growth and more stability and all that stuff. Uh,
Something you said there, though, that I do want to talk about, talking about a living wage. Like, one of the ways to combat money in politics is to actually come up with bold ideas, because
yeah,
that really does suck the oxygen out of the status quo. Because people, I think, very quickly recognize, like, oh, you're right, that does suck, and here is an opportunity to do something much better. And I think that's something our party has been really, really hesitant to do since Kathleen Wynne. Both David Peterson and Kathleen Wynne talked about, the radical center, that kind of idea. And we just really haven't been interested in bold ideas, I think, in the last two rounds of leadership. And if we're really going to get back into it, I think one, we need to do that just in general to attract new people to the party. But two, politics really only changes. You really only have seismic changes in politics when there's a new era upon you, and you actually have to embrace that era. So, as a party, I think we have to look towards the future and say, like, what is the solution for the next 25 years, not the next, like, 3 years? We actually have to look far into the distance and give people a bold vision of opportunity going forward, or else they're not going to want to take a risk on us in the first place.
Yeah. Um, I'm just looking at the clock here and I see we're coming up on an hour. So I'm not going to I don't think we're going to need to beat a dead horse here because, nobody's paying us to solve the world's problems yet.
But they're
Uh,
welcome to.
there, by all means, it would be one weekend, boom, it's done. Uh,
Exactly.
uh, but I'm going to leave it, maybe leave both of you with the last word on, what are you looking for in Ontario in 2026, or maybe even I'll go a little bit further. Like, what are you looking forward to seeing, or what do you hope to see uh, come about? Nathaniel, I'm going to start with you.
Um, well, the teachers are uh they're bargaining this year. So that's gonna be fun. That'll be interesting. I do hope that people understand that the massive, massive cuts to education have put education workers in an almost impossible position. And I really hope that education workers are ready to stand up for the students and for the quality of the classrooms.
Teresa.
For me, it's just a small thing. I'm really hoping that my existential dread will start to feel misplaced and that the arc of the moral universe does bend towards justice. It would be great to feel that way a little bit next year. Hasn't felt that way a lot this year. In terms of politics in Ontario going forward, like I think once the Ontario Liberal race starts going, hopefully, I'd like to see some really good ideas, some innovative ideas put in the window, and some, you know, actually compelling candidates step forward. Like, a girl can dream, but those two things together, I think, are part of the recipe for replacing the current Ford government. It's not all the way there. There's a lot of hard work that has to go into that and a lot of willingness that has to be behind that. But I think, you know, and not to be biased against the NDP, like if they want to, surge ahead and do a great job too, like welcome, like we just need Doug for it. But I think seeing some kind of progressive life in the new year would be really, really great at this point because 8 years is a really, really long time. But adding on four more is just kind of unbearable at this point. So seeing some signs of life because I think we haven't seen that in 2025 at all. To your point, there hasn't been a lot of action. There's been a lot of recalibration maybe behind the scenes, but we need to start seeing some energy on the front lines.
All right, I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much, Nathaniel Arfin and Teresa Lubowitz, for joining me today. Um, all the best. Happy New Year. Merry Christmas. Goodwill to men and women
Wordsman.
of all shapes and sizes. Let's just leave it at that. All right. Thank you very
Yeah.
much, both of you.
Thank you.
Thanks.